Hi guys, JK here. So in this video, I'll be giving you guys some tips to climb the Hearthstone ladder to rank 5. So, why rank 5? Rank 5 is important mainly because it is the rank that you will be awarded a golden epic in the reward chest given at the start of every month. However, if you can constantly climb to rank 5 with ease, chances are you'll be able to climb to legend with a little bit more effort, experience, and luck. So here are my tips to help you climb the Hearthstone ladder. Number 1. Knowing the meta, or your local meta. The climbing of the ladder starts even before you click the play button. So, before you start to play, you need to know what decks and classes are currently the most popular or most played, which is denoted by the term meta game or meta for short. Therefore, what I meant by your local meta is the decks that you will face around your rank when you click that play button, as that meta may be different at different ranks. But note that the meta is constantly changing over time. Decks you face in the first hour of your climb can be totally different from the next, so don't expect it to always stay the same. Number 2. Your deck choice. So now that you know what type of decks and classes are being played the most on the ladder, you now must decide on a deck that has an advantage over those decks, so that you can win against those decks and earn stars to actually climb the ladder. However, if you yourself are not proficiently skilled in playing that deck, it may have a negative effect on your climb instead. Therefore, I recommend that you pick a deck that you are able to play well, or if such deck doesn't exist, you could try practicing the deck on casual play, or if you do not mind losing a few stars, you can also practice on rank mode 2, which could also help you to scout out your local meta. Number 3. Identifying what your opponent is playing. So after you finally picked and mastered your deck, you can finally begin to climb the ladder seriously. And you queue into this random guy who is playing, for example, a warlock. So if you already studied the meta in the first point, you would know that he's likely to be playing either a Zoo warlock or Rainbow warlock. You have no idea which variation he's playing, and neither do I. But it is sometimes possible to tell which variation of warlock your opponent is playing by looking at the number of cards in Mulligan. The theory here is that since aggro-ish decks like the Zoo Warlock are built to be more consistent early game by playing more low-cost cards, which they will want to keep in their starting hand. So, I would assume that the more cards he keeps, the higher the chances he's playing an aggressive variation of the class. So what if my opponent starts second and chooses to mulligan 2 cards, for example? Well, to be honest, I also have no idea. However, it's always safer to mulligan for an aggressive opponent than an opponent playing a control deck. Because even if your opponent is playing a control deck, after you mulligan for an aggressive opponent, you'll most likely have the time to react than doing the opposite. Since aggressive decks tends to want to end the game early, while control decks will not always have the same option to end the game early. Number 4. Knowing your opponent's playing options. So, after you mulligan correctly against the right opponent, and now you're in the middle of a game, you are given the option to either commit your whole hand and probably win the game, or play safe and try not to lose everything to a single bot wipe, for example. Well, if you study the meta and correctly identify what your opponent is playing, you will know exactly what is the best play. Let's say you have identified that your opponent is playing a Zoo Warlock. You will know that the chances of them having any AoE spells are pretty low, and committing your whole hand wouldn't get you punished too hard. But if you identify that your opponent is playing a control variation of the Warlock, for example, the Reno Warlock, then the same option will not be true, because their deck lists almost always include AoE spells like Twisting Nether and Hellfire. So, knowing what your opponent is playing and knowing their options is key. Number 5. Keeping track of what your opponent has played. So, you have studied the meta, picked the deck, identified what your opponent is playing, and have a general idea of what your opponent's deck is made out of. And now, in the middle of the game, your opponent has already played multiple cards. The basics are that if you have seen 2 of the same card being played, chances that you will see the same card being played again to be exactly 0, unless one of the cards being played previously has the text below it, created from something. The advanced level is knowing what cards are more important to keep track of. These cards include burn spells like Fireball and Lava Burst, minions with charge like Wolf Rider and Uriel Jenkins, removal spells like Execute and Hex, and of course, AoE spells like Consecration and Swipe. All the card types mentioned before are likely to change the type of a game and are cards you want to play around, or force your opponent to play them prematurely. Number 6. Setting up lethal and spotting lethal. My last tip on climbing the ladder is the ability to spot lethal and setting up lethal to win on the following turn. This last one is very important because you may have controlled the game flow well and it's almost winning, but failed to spot lethal to kill your opponent, causing you to lose the game, which ultimately means that you wasted your time playing the current game as well as the previous game because you lost a star instead of gaining one. So, the trick here, which is not really any secret or technique, is to just take your time and not rush through your turn. Using your time to think through various combinations of plays that you can kill your opponent or set up a kill on your following turn. If none of them are available, try to find a way that can make your opponent have a very hard time to turn the game around. Because I've seen too many people rush through their turn, missing lethal and losing them the game they would otherwise have won. Also, if the plays you want to make includes drawing a card for sure, you should almost always draw the card first, because you'll never know if the card drawn will change your play this turn. Lastly, do not make unnecessary plays, otherwise known as BM, when you are winning, because if you're not careful, you can easily miscalculate and miss lethal, losing you that game because your turn timer ran out. So guys, these are my tips on climbing a Hearthstone ladder. Hope they will aid you in your climb. If they did or you enjoyed our content, remember to like, subscribe, or if you have any burning questions, please leave a comment below. That's all from me. Thank you for watching. Bye.